Speaking on behalf of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, we want to draw attention to the outrageous violations of all possible norms of freedom of religion and even basic moral norms. Millions of Orthodox Christians in Ukraine are being discriminated against. We call on all UN member states and observers, the UN Secretary General, international human rights organizations to prevent this coming tragedy. We convened a meeting of the Security Council to prevent the situation from slipping into disaster. However, the representatives of the West, with their characteristic disregard for any offenses or crimes committed by their clients, have essentially spoken out in support of Kiev's policy. According to some, religious communities are not protected by the right to freedom of religion at all. Let us commit this statement to memory. It will still find its place in history. Others have argued that the disaster we are describing simply does not exist. It was because of this that we decided to invite briefers who are personally familiar with these so-called non-existent persecutions. But before I give them the floor, let me show you two videos, in one of which you will hear a statement by a parishioner of the Kiev Pечерsk Lavra, and in the other, an address from the monks of the Lavra themselves.
Это безобразие. Считаю, что просто преступление. Это со стороны властей. Во-первых, религия отделена от государства. Во-вторых, наша православная вера, старинная вера, князь Владимир, равноапостольная княгиня Ольга, это все наше. И вмешивать сюда политику нет никакого смысла. Если будет ПЦУ, я сюда в Лавру буду, может, ходить только к мощам, совершенно не участвуя в молитве с ПЦУ. Потому что мощи есть мощи, это святое. И я считаю, ПЦУ – это организация клубная, это не православная организация, это клуб по интересам, потому что он создан на воздухе, а не от апостолов.
Дайте можливість братії монашестві, віруючим людям молитись, жити. Повірте, ми не вороги.
If someone wants to come here and beat us, we aren't afraid of anybody.
Нас більше 200 чоловік, тільки братії з послушниками. Сьогодні тут знаходиться центр управління Української Православної Церкви.
Suntem acum în Sfânta Mănăstire Lavra Pecersca din Kiev, unde se află peste 160 de sfinte moaște. Această Sfântă Mănăstire vreau acum să o închidă.
we did nothing against our church, nothing against our country.
Ми молимось і просимо, щоб молитва ця ніколи не закінчувалась на цій Богом благословенній землі.
Сейчас
And now, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Mira Vladimirovna Tarada, director of the NGO Foundation to Battle Injustice. You have the floor, Ms. Tarada.
Мира Владимировна, вы слышите нас?
Mira Vladimirovna, can you hear us? Yes. Good morning.
Hello, everyone. I would like to speak today about the violation of the rights and persecution of Christian believers in Ukraine that has reached the scale of anti-Christian persecution in ancient Rome. Religious persecution and repression against Christians began to occur with frightening frequency in Ukraine. During the 12 months of 2022 and 4 months of 2023, hundreds of Christian sites were attacked. Thousands of parishioners and clergy faced persecution because of their faith. The abbots of churches and monasteries are abducted by the Ukrainian special services. They tortured and kept in unbearable conditions, forcing them to renounce their faith. It's believed that some cases of discrimination or harassment are the result of tension between different religious groups, while others are the direct result of individual or institutional BS on the part of the current Ukrainian government. Orthodoxy has become a political project in the hands of the Ukrainian regime. The attacks on representatives of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church began long before the start of the special military operation. But after February 24th, 2022, they occurred catastrophic proportions. In less than a year, about 100 religious sites in the area of the special military operation were subjected to various kinds of repression by the Ukrainian government. Clergymen who continue to fulfill their duty despite the difficult social situation and military censorship are abducted and beaten, tortured, and camped in inhumane conditions. In addition, the abbots of churches are forced to publicly speak against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Direct state pressure on the UOC has been systematically exerted since 2014, but then this process had a much smaller scale. Zelensky willingly picked up the persecution against the clergy. It's known that clerics are accused of high treason for having literature with a double-headed eagle, as well as for historical books devoted to the common history of the Russian and Ukrainian people. The wave of persecution, repression, and abuse of believers and clergy in Ukraine has reached unprecedented and proportions since the time of pagan Rome. Zelensky's government denies citizenship to priests who are suspected to having ties with Russia, and also conduct raids and searches in churches. In January 2023, Zelensky suspended the citizenship of 13 priests, as it was mentioned, of the UOC, who, due to the unprecedented tightening of Ukrainian legislation, could be expelled from the territory of Ukraine. A month earlier, a Ukrainian politician imposed sanctions against 7 prominent figures of the UOC. Among the victims of the sanctions, the managing director of the UOC, Metropolitan Anthony of Borispol, and Bravarsky Metropolitan Panteleimon of Lugansk and Alchevsk, Metropolitan Luke of Zaporozhye and Melitopol, Metropolitan Miletius of Chernivtsi and Bukhavina.
Looks like we lost connection.
Since November last year, the Security Service of Ukraine has been conducting searches and shrines and churches throughout the country. Some representatives of the clergy who are accused of provocations against the state and the army face serious accusations devoid of any objectivity. Clergymen are stripped naked. They are photographed and searched, in some cases abducted and sentenced to real prison terms. In January 2023, the Ukrainian Prosecutor Office opened a criminal case against Metropolitan Pavel Lebed, rector of the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra. He is accused of inciting religious hatred because of the cleric's statement to the Ukrainian authorities, whom he accused of persecution of the church. In March of this year, the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine unilaterally terminated the lease agreement of the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra and demanded that the monks of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church leave the monastery or go to the schematic Orthodox Church of Ukraine. For refusing to carry out the orders of Kiev, the vicar of the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, Metropolitan Pavel Lebed, was accused of inciting interreligious hostility and justifying the armed aggression of Russia. Kiev security forces, Ukrainian nationalists, as well as representatives of the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra Reserve, are trying to block monks and parishioners from entering the territory of the Lavra. Clashes and provocations regularly occur. As of May 2023, the Security Service of Ukraine has opened about 75 criminal proceedings against representatives of the UOC. While militant atheist groups and schematic forces in Ukraine continue to desecrate the symbols of the Orthodox faith, which have sacred significance for tens of millions of citizens, the Ukrainian mass media are conducting campaigns against believers. Christians are increasingly facing criticism and persecution in all spheres of life, from mass culture to publication on social networks. The persecution of representatives of the UOC in Ukraine is an unprecedented challenge to the modern world, requiring global awareness, diplomatic efforts, and cooperation between countries and intergovernmental organizations. Only by joining efforts can a more just and tolerant society be created, where everyone can freely practice their religion or beliefs without fear of persecution. I hope that the United Nations will not ignore the problem of the persecution of Christians in Ukraine. Thank you.
Спасибо вам.
Thank you very much, Mira Vladimirovna.
Trying to connect with our next briefer, and I will be advised whether the connection has been established shortly. While we are trying to connect, I think that in order not to lose time, I will start with the Security Council members that asked for the floor, and then when the connection is established, we'll give the floor to our next briefer. And first on my list is Ecuador, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for giving me the floor. My delegation acknowledges and always defends the freedom of thought, religion, and worship, in line with Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. That is why we are concerned that the military aggression against Ukraine has resulted in the destruction of religious sites, as UNESCO has said in its preliminary investigation into the matter. In this regard, I reiterate what is stated in Optional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions on the prevention of the protection of victims of armed conflicts, and Article 53 prohibits any acts of hostility on places of worship which are cultural or spiritual heritage. As in any military aggression, the people bear the brunt of the suffering, particularly the most vulnerable people. Finally, we stress for there to be the need to be an end of the military aggression in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, and now I give the floor to Chai.
Thank you, Vasily. I would like to thank the Russian delegation for organizing this meeting. I listened carefully to the briefings. I'm looking forward to hearing another briefing, who will get online soon, I hope. Just to share some views, today we live in a world of different cultures, races, skin colors, religions, and different social systems. Religious tolerance plays an important role in effectively preventing and resolving conflicts, promoting inter- and intrastate peace and reconciliation. Many post-Cold War armed conflicts were stoked and aggravated by the failure to address religious issues well. To resolve conflicts and build lasting peace, we also need to promote interreligious and intercultural dialogue and cooperation, uphold religious and social harmony. As the JR Resolution A-76/254 unanimously adopted in March last year to establish an international day to combat Islamophobia, we need to strengthen international efforts to foster global dialogue, and we need to oppose all the violent attacks against the places of worship, as well as attacks on and in religious places, sites, and shrines that are in violation of international law. All countries should protect citizen freedom, religious belief, and manage religious affairs according to law, and protect normal religious activities. Different religions and different sects should enhance communication and deepen understanding to become a positive force for peace and unity. We call on the basis of respecting human rights and religious diversity to strengthen international efforts to foster a global dialogue on the promotion of a culture of tolerance and peace at all levels. China's position on the issue of Ukraine is clear-cut and consistent. We always maintain that all countries' sovereignty and territorial integrity should be respected, the purposes and principles of the UN Charter be complied with, legitimate security concerns of all countries be taken seriously, all efforts conducive to peaceful settlement to the crisis be supported. The conflict is still dragging on. Recently, there has been some escalation on the battlefield, which is deeply worrying. The international community should persist in the right goal of pushing for peace talks and help to open the door as quickly as possible to political settlement to the crisis. Any practice of adding fuel to the fire and aggravating tension should be abandoned. China stands ready to work with the international community to make unremitting efforts towards early cessation of hostilities and resumption of peace. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to the United States.
The United States takes seriously allegations of violations of human rights, including the freedom of religion or belief. We expect all countries to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. However, it's hard to take seriously Russia's meeting today as a genuine expression of concern and demonstration of its commitment to religious freedom. Russia's flagrant and pervasive violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms, both in Russia itself and in Russian or occupied areas of Ukraine, make us question its motive for calling today's meeting. So do the tens of thousands of Russian troops on Ukraine's soil and trail of atrocities, war crimes, and civilian casualties left in the wake of its invasion. Reportedly, the Russian government continues to detain, physically abuse, torture, and imprison individuals on the basis of their religious beliefs or affiliations. Russia continues to ban religious groups and wrongfully label them and organizations it associates with them as extremist, terrorist, or undesirable. Russia's authorities apply these unfounded designations to Jehovah's Witnesses, members of the Melgis of the Crimean Tatars, followers of Muslim theologian Said Nursi, and multiple evangelical Protestant groups, and many others. Russia claims to be concerned about religious freedom in Ukraine. If so, Russia should be honest about the consequences of its full-scale invasion in Ukraine, including on the ability of Ukrainians to practice their faith. Russia's damage to religious sites and places of worship in Ukraine is simply appalling. Ukraine's Institute for Religious Freedom has cataloged that Russia's invasion has destroyed, damaged, or led to the looting of 494 religious sites in Ukraine. The official UNESCO count is 109 religious sites. We remain concerned about the safety of members of all religious communities in Ukraine, particularly those living in areas under Russia's control or occupation, including members of the Independent Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Crimean Tatar Muslims, Jehovah's Witnesses, Ukrainian Greek Catholics, evangelicals, Baptists, and members of other religious groups. Since 2014, Russia's authorities have harassed, intimidated, prosecuted, or imprisoned dozens of Crimean Tatars on charges that independent observers characterize as baseless. If Russia truly cared about religious freedom in Ukraine, it would immediately cease its senseless war, withdraw its forces, and respect the human rights of all and the safety of the civilian population of Ukraine, including of members of all religious communities. Thank you.
I expected nothing less. Thank you. And now I would like to interrupt our members and give the floor to the briefer with whom we established connection. And I'll give the floor to Bishop Gedeon, who has his own personal experience about the subject we're discussing today. Владыка, вам слово, пожалуйста.
You have the floor, Bishop. Can you hear us? We cannot hear you. Hello, says the bishop.
Слышно меня? Да.
Yes, says the bishop. I would like to say a few very important words today. I could be in the Guinness Book of World Records because I've been stripped of Ukrainian nationality twice, and not for any of my own political views, but for my Orthodox faith. Because the Orthodox Church today is being oppressed on the territory of Ukraine through all means available. The Constitution is being trampled, the law is being trampled, the law of Ukraine. Every possible law that exists today, I'm not going to list them all in order not to take up today. All of this is being violated. And one particular violation is inflaming interconfessional or interfaith hatred, which is something that is in the Ukrainian constitution. The Orthodox churches of Ukraine and Russia are being pitted against each other. They are being demeaned. The church is being demeaned and disparaged. Churches are being closed. Clergy men are being killed or being beaten. And our shrines, our Orthodox shrines, are being desecrated as well. Dogs are being taken into churches and monasteries where for centuries, if not millennia, people have been praying to God, such as the Kiev Pechersk Lavra and other monasteries, including the first church of Kiev, Russia, where there are simply pictures of children's pictures with depicting doves that say peace. All of these are being ripped off, they're being trampled, and all of this is being condoned or covered up by Ukrainian authorities. They are not standing in the way in any way. The police, calling the police is not having any effect. And in terms of my personal experience as a bishop who has lived his entire life in Ukraine, first Poroshenko deprived me of citizenship for speaking out openly in the media in accordance with my conscience as a bishop. And even though later the Supreme Court decided that I was to have my citizenship returned to me, but then President Zelensky, once again, with just one stroke of the pen, deprived me of my citizenship again. and this go on. I've been put into various computer systems that are available internationally, which led to my arrest and detention in Athens, where they placed me in conditions where they expected people of other faiths and other nationalities to abuse me in some way, but they did not touch me. And finally, I was put into my own cell. And I can cite thousands of examples. Some 90% of Ukraine's population is suffering from the actions of the authorities today, and there are numerous confirmations of this, not just my testimony as a bishop, as a person who was born in Ukraine and spent their whole life in Ukraine. I know Ukraine from the inside out. Have you concluded, Bishop? Yes, I am a personal witness. I spoke in Congress. I testified in Congress back under Trump and Pompeo. I have evidence on my phone that I showed to the congressman of the United States. It was a video that testified to horrific human rights violations, to inhuman degradation, inhuman treatment towards the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and worshipers. Thank you very much, Bishop, says the permanent representative. And I now give the floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. The issue of the freedom of religion in the Ukraine was subject to a Security Council meeting last January. On the occasion, we highlighted the importance that Brazil attaches to the subject in the light of the role of all religions in the development of the individual and the cultural identity of peoples. Our position remains unchanged. I would like just to emphasize 3 points. First, freedom of religion is a fundamental human right enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in multilateral instruments such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and of Discrimination based on Religion or Belief, adopted by the General Assembly in 1981. Second, religious differences must not be used to feed tensions between groups or states. Brazil takes pride in being a nation formed by the confluence of various civilizations, learning how to better understand one another, both in our differences and in our shared humanity, is key to the flourishing of our societies. In this sense, we reiterate the call for moderation and respect for religious diversity. Third, we believe in the potential of religion to bring people together and promote peace. This is even more true of Russia and Ukraine, which share the Orthodox faith as a common element in their cultural identities. Mr. President, Brazil follows with great concern the intensification of fighting and expresses solidarity with the civilian population of Ukraine. We reiterate the appeal in favor of the engagement of the parties in the search for a diplomatic solution to the conflict based on the principles of the UN Charter. As many of you know, the etymology of the word religion conveys an idea of binding again. It's essential to stop the violence immediately and put to an end to the senseless loss of human life and destruction. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil, and now I want to apologize.
Representative of UK, I will give you the floor after the briefer who we connected with just a few minutes ago. Хочу предоставить слово.
I now give the floor to Ivan Melnik, the Vice President of the Russian Division of the International Committee for the Protection of Human Rights. Ivan, can you hear me? Dear colleagues, distinguished representatives of member states of the United Nations, I would like to draw attention to the topic of the oppression of the clergy of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. The traditional Russian Orthodox Church on the territory of Ukraine, which is regrettably taking place currently. These reprisals have unfortunately reached a very major, very serious scale. They're now happening on a very large scale, and many of the clergymen are essentially being detained and deprived of their liberty simply for being representatives of the traditional religious faith. Over the past few years, the representatives of a number of Ukrainian radical organizations, as well as the security forces, have regularly forcibly expelled representatives of the traditional Orthodox Church from their churches in order to transfer those churches over to the more loyal so-called Orthodox Church of Ukraine. And of course, I believe this to be absolutely unacceptable. There is a large number of videos on the internet with evidence of this. I understand that there is a major tension in Ukraine right now, that there are huge problems, and that everything Russian is being banned. But when it comes to religion, we need to stop and think and ask ourselves what is going on. In the Ukraine, a large number of clerics are under arrest or in pretrial detention, as is the case with the abbot of the church in Zhytomyr region, as well as several other clerics in other regions. They were arrested by representatives of the Ukrainian security forces and have been held in various jails for months. They are publicly accused of espionage in favor of Russia under Article 101 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, as well as assisting warfare against the armed forces of Ukraine. But the worst and the most horrifying thing of all is that often these clerics held in dungeons are being subjected to torture. And one proven case of this took place with Archpriest Andrei Pavlenko. And I regularly addressed the OSCE and wrote to the OSCE and a number of international organizations regarding his case. Archpriest Andrei said that as soon as he found himself in the police station, he was brutally beaten for many hours. Today, even though many months have passed since he was exchanged, he is still suffering the impacts, the health impacts of those beatings. I would draw attention and ask that following our meeting, an address be directed to the head of Ukraine about the liberation of Mironets and Boyko, the two other clerics who have also been detained, and according to the information I have also suffered torture, beatings, and are being held in unacceptable conditions. A large number of international conventions is being violated in this, and of course the international community cannot stand idly by. I understand that these days the majority of countries is trying to support Ukraine, but you cannot support violations of human rights, whoever commits them. It is impossible. It is important now that we prevent the expulsion of monks from the Kiev-Pечorsk Lavra. We are all seeing this in the news, on various YouTube channels. We're seeing the attempts to forcibly seize one of the most important Orthodox Christian shrines, the Kiev-Pечorsk Lavra, and simply transfer it from one church to another. And this is an outright violation of the rights of those monks who live on the territory of the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra. A number of clerics have been placed under house arrest. They have been deprived of their liberty. And for what? For continuing to be dedicated to the traditional canons of the Orthodox Church. This is a very dangerous trend, of course. From this important rostrum, I would, of course, ask that all members of today's meeting draw their attention to this. It is important, despite the emotions that may be raging right now, to prevent such catastrophic consequences as violations of the rights of worshipers, as the destruction of shrines. And I hope that peace, of course, will come as soon as possible, and an opportunity will be created to protect and maintain the rights, religious rights of people in Ukraine. I thank you very much for giving me the floor, and I hope that God will protect us all. Thank you, Ivan. In his briefing, Ivan mentioned Archpriest Andrei Pavlenko, who was supposed to be one of our briefers today. Unfortunately, for technical reasons, this was impossible. This was the same Father Andrei that spent 10 months in the dungeons of the security services of Ukraine. And I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you. Colleagues, when Russia called a council meeting on this issue in January, we were clear that its goal was to obfuscate and distract from its actions in Ukraine. It's not difficult to see why Russia is calling to distract us again now. Since January, the Office for the High Commissioner on Human Rights has reported at least 1,760 civilians have been killed as a result of Russia's war. A further 3,000 civilians have been injured, many of them in Russia's relentless airstrikes, which have hit ordinary homes, critical infrastructure, and in the last few days, a Red Cross warehouse filled with humanitarian aid. Russia continues to forcibly transfer or deport Ukrainian children, a practice that OHCHR and the OSCE's Moscow mechanism concluded violates international humanitarian law and may amount to a crime against humanity. The long list of Russia's violations and abuses of human rights and fundamental freedoms in Ukraine continues to grow. Colleagues, the UK is committed to ensuring that everyone, everywhere, can enjoy their human right to freedom of religion or belief. We condemn any persecution based on an individual's religion or belief. This is a commitment we share with Ukraine, which is a pluralist and multi-faith democracy. Far from seeking to protect freedom of religion or belief, Russia is causing more and more damage. Religion and belief communities in Russia and areas of Ukraine under Russian control continue to suffer repression, from the prohibition of religious literature to some religious groups being banned from existing entirely, while Ukrainians are fighting to protect their human rights and fundamental freedoms. Russia is fighting to deny them. We recall that Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, the spiritual head of the world's Orthodox Christians, has called Russia's invasion of Ukraine a crime of aggression and called upon Orthodox Christians, both in Ukraine and Russia, to resist and neutralize the capacity of the leadership of the Moscow Patriarchate to theologically legitimize criminal behavior. Russia said that it wanted to use this meeting to discuss obligations under the UN Charter and Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But Russia started this war, invading Ukraine's sovereign territory in blatant violation of Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. If Russia really wants to protect the human rights of millions of Ukrainians, it must cease its attacks, end its invasion, and withdraw its troops from Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, and I now give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Thank you, Chair. Mozambique thanks the Russian Federation for organizing this meeting. We also thank the briefers, the various briefers, for their testimonies and insights. The notion of safeguarding freedoms is part of the raison d'etre of our organization since its inception. In fact, freedom, including religious freedom, is clearly enshrined in Article 1, Number 3 of the Charter, which spells out the purposes of the UN as inter alia, and I quote, encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion, end of quote. These tenets underscore the premises that freedom of religion is integral to the pursuit of peace and security as a valuable catalyst of positive social capital. Furthermore, freedom of religion or belief is guaranteed by Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it is against this backdrop that Mozambique is of the view that threats to freedom of religion are to be addressed swiftly as they exacerbate conflicts where they occur and constitute major drivers of conflicts. Examples of this dangerous dynamic abound around the world and throughout history. Mr. Chair, there are no religious solutions for religious problems when it comes to peace and security. This requires a political solution. In this regard, we reiterate our call for the immediate cessation of hostilities and the return to direct negotiation between parties. We urge leaders to refrain from using religion for political gains and incitement of violence. On the contrary, tolerance, mutual respect, empathy, inclusion, solidarity, dignity, equal rights, and multiculturalism are the cornerstones of a plural and humane society. Mr. Chair, we consider religious actors and leaders as part of the eventual solution to this conflict. They will play an important role in building bridges and help parties to find a common ground and promote healing amongst warring communities. Eventually, the conflicting parties will have to return to the negotiating table, and the role of faith-based organizations and religious tolerance as a trust-building factors cannot be underestimated, as we have ourselves learned from our own peace and reconciliation process in Mozambique. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Mozambique, and now I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, Switzerland remains deeply concerned by the grave violations of human rights and international humanitarian law resulting from Russia's ongoing military aggression against Ukraine over the past 15 months. Switzerland condemns the recent rise in Russian airstrikes in several regions of Ukraine. We are shocked by reports that these attacks have again killed and injured dozens of civilians. The devastating consequences of the war are also reflected in the numerous accounts of atrocities committed in Ukraine. With regards to freedom of religion and belief, Switzerland reiterates its opposition to the propagation and dissemination of hate speech, as well as to any other forms and manifestations of defamation or discrimination based on religion. We encourage interreligious and intercultural dialogue in order to promote peaceful coexistence. To this end, we call upon religious institutions and leaders to engage in building bridges by using a rhetoric of peace and reconciliation. Switzerland recalls the obligations under international human rights law, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. All persons must be able to exercise their rights to freedom of opinion and expression, peaceful assembly and association, and religion without any discrimination. We reiterate our principled position that freedom of religion and belief protect the individual, not religions or religious communities. Any limitations on the right to manifest one's religion or belief must be prescribed by law, necessary and proportionate. Human rights and international humanitarian law must be respected by all parties to the conflict, and the principles of the United Nations Charter must be upheld. We thus call on Russia to de-escalate the situation immediately, to cease all hostilities, and to withdraw its troops from Ukrainian territory without delay. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland, and I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, Chair. We regret to note that once again the Arria format is being used as a tool by the Russian Federation to deviate the focus from the appalling acts by Russian forces in Ukraine and to cynically try to justify the unjustifiable. This approach is not new. Since the beginning of its aggression against its sovereign neighbor, Russia has constantly sought to distort reality and spread disinformation. Let us be clear, Malta takes seriously allegations of violations of human rights, including the freedom of religion or belief. Any ideologies that encourage racism, discrimination, xenophobia, and all other forms of intolerance have received the sternest condemnation from us on several occasions inside and outside the Council. As has been previously pointed out, Russia has caused significant harm to religious sites and places of worship in Ukraine, despite expressing concern for religious freedom. UNESCO has confirmed the destruction of more than 100 religious sites following Russia's unprovoked war against Ukraine. In regions of Ukraine that are under Russia's control or occupation, persistent and widespread indications of human rights violations by Russia against peaceful members of religious communities that it deems extremist or undesired have been documented. This highlights the clear discrepancy between Russia's professed commitment to religious freedom and its actions towards Ukraine's religious communities. We cannot stress enough that international humanitarian law and international human rights law must be fully respected and upheld. Malta reiterates its urgent call on the Russian Federation to implement without delay the recommendations of the OSCE's latest Moscow Mechanism report and to take all necessary measures to allow for the safe return of the displaced or forcibly displaced children to Ukraine, as well as their families and communities. Colleagues, the most effective approach to safeguarding the rights of all individuals is to put an end to the unprovoked and unjustified war against Ukraine. We remain firm in our position that those who have committed crimes must be held accountable for their actions as mandated by international law. We urge the Russian Federation to halt hostilities, withdraw its military forces from the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, and engage in constructive dialogue and diplomacy. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta, and I now give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Chair. Freedom of religion and belief is an integral part of international human rights standards, enshrined in various legal instruments and national legislations around the world. Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. As a country where religions, communities live in harmony, tolerance, and with mutual respect, and where respect for human rights is at the core of its society, Albania fully supports the freedom of religion and belief anywhere. This is crucial for fostering a diverse and inclusive society, promoting tolerance and protecting the autonomy and dignity of individuals. Colleagues, after reading the concept note for this meeting, it is hard escaping a sense of perplexity. While, as stated above, we deem the respect of human rights and the freedom of religion and belief everywhere, we cannot fail to notice a fundamental contradiction. Russia, the country that has initiated and continues a brutal military aggression in Ukraine, with disastrous consequences, including massive human rights breaches, war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetrated by its forces cannot take the high moral ground and lecture us about respect for human rights. This is simply cynical and hypocrite, and unfortunately not for the first time. The problem today in Ukraine is not the situation of its freedom of religion and belief. The real problem of Ukraine is that it is not free because it has been invaded by its neighbor, which is trying to steal its freedom. Therefore, it is not Ukraine we should be talking about, but rather Russia, its actions and their consequences. As it was confirmed last week in a similar meeting, since the beginning of the military aggression, UNESCO has verified damage to no less than 109 religious sites. During these 16 months of war, Russia has tried to weaponize everything. Today, it is the turn of religion with the aim to sow division and incite social tensions in Ukraine. We expect religious leaders anywhere to work for peace, social cohesion, and peaceful coexistence, show courage to condemn violence and crimes, including the crime of aggression, and not to support it. They should condemn the killing of civilians, the deportation of children, and the deliberate destruction of religious sites. They should support unity, not sow division. Therefore, if Russia is really interested to support the freedom of religion in Ukraine and help religious institutions and organizations there, it should put an immediate end to its war, withdraw its troops, respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, and start treating Ukraine with respect. Thank you.
Thank you, and I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Mr. Chair, at the outset, Japan would like to emphasize the importance of the freedom of religion or belief as an enduring, universal value in the international community. It is a foundation of societies. History has demonstrated that the lack of mutual respect between different religions can lead to tragedies. Addressing the challenges of today's international community is impossible without considering religion. Therefore, we reiterate our unwavering commitment to the freedom of religion or belief. Japan has consistently supported relevant General Assembly resolutions, firmly standing in favor of this fundamental value. In this meeting, however, it appears that Russia is portraying itself as a defender of this freedom using false rhetoric. As the overwhelming majority of the General Assembly has repeatedly emphasized, it is Russia that has invaded Ukraine and destroyed peaceful lives of its innocent citizens. Russia repeatedly attempted to divert public attention from its own violations of the UN Charter and to deceive the international community into believing that there is some point we should take into account in its arguments. Such a narrative, in an attempt to legitimize one's violations by claiming that others are also in violation, is unacceptable. For as long as Russia continues to evade accountability for its aggression, the international community will repeat the same condemnation. Russia must withdraw all of its troops and military equipment from Ukraine and respect Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. There's one more procedural concern on this Arria meeting. On 17th March, an Arria meeting on the human rights situations in the DPRK was held. One council member blocks the meeting to be broadcasted by UNTV. Since then, a total of 5 Arria meetings, including this meeting, was not broadcasted. For future Arria meetings, Council should be aware of transparency if the content of the meetings contribute to the maintenance of the international peace and security, and if the content does not require to be low profile. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur l'ambassadeur.
Thank you, Ambassador, dear colleagues. Once again, Russia is undertaking an exercise in distraction and disinformation. Since it launched its war of aggression against Ukraine, Russia has been trying to justify the unjustifiable through various spurious pretexts. Russia is manipulating the issue of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Russia is politicizing the freedom of religion or belief with a disinformation campaign which will not make us overlook its attack on Ukrainian independence. Russia must face up to its contradictions. It has made itself guilty of crimes and serious violations of human rights and international humanitarian law in Ukraine. The convening of this meeting in the name of the upholding the freedom of religion and belief is just cynical. The facts are clear. Russia is targeting civilians. Russia is destroying civilian infrastructure. Russia is destroying Ukraine's heritage. As UNESCO has said, more than 100 religious buildings have been partially or entirely destroyed in the wake of the Russian aggression. We urge Russia to act in line with international law and to implement Resolution 2347. Dear colleagues, the autocephaly of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was recognized in 2018. We are deeply concerned by the situation of the Crimean Tatars and Protestants whose rights are flouted in the occupied territory, in the territories occupied by Ukraine. France welcomes the efforts that have been made to document the facts by the international and national mechanisms of inquiry, and those responsible must be held accountable. The only way to protect the civilians is for Russia to end its aggression. Russia should withdraw all of its troops from Ukrainian territory. France will continue to defend the freedom of religion or belief and all fundamental freedoms throughout the world, notably in Russia, where civil society is repressed brutally and where journalists are arrested and there are reprisals against political opponents and civil society as well. We urge the Russian authorities to end these violations and to act in line with their international obligations, notably pursuant to the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Ghana.
Thank you, Chair. In January, when this subject was addressed in the formal meeting of the Security Council, my delegation underscored the freedom of religion as a fundamental human right guaranteed under international human rights laws. We also urged that any restrictive actions by the state must be temporary and undertaken with recourse to international law. In reiterating these points today, we also stress that religion and the expression of faith must not be used to advance a political agenda that threatens the security of any particular group of people or the sovereignty of Ukraine. Rather than be a dividing factor, religion should serve as the mouthpiece for reconciliation and the restoration of peace. It would be necessary to address as part of the factors at play in the conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine the question of the future of the Orthodox Church. We therefore urge religious leaders to commit to the process of dialogue and negotiations in good faith and with mutual respect. With reference to the Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and Discrimination Based on Religion or Belief, we encourage religious leaders of the Orthodoxy to eschew all forms of religious intolerance, hate speech, and other discriminatory actions. At the same time, we are drawing attention to international prohibitions against the intentional destruction of cultural heritage, which include religious sites, places of worship, and monuments. While we recognize the interplay between the exercise of religion and security, we remain of the view that all violations relating to human rights, including religious rights and freedoms, ought properly to be brought within the forum of the Human Rights Council and other mandated regional bodies for appropriate remedy. Let me conclude, Chair, by reiterating Ghana's persistent call for the immediate and unconditional cessation of hostilities as we urge a new chapter of political settlement facilitated by dialogue and diplomacy. I thank you.
Thank you, and I now give the floor to the UAE.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a country of more than 200 nationalities and many faiths living side by side together, the United Arab Emirates places great emphasis on the protection of the freedom of religion and the promotion of tolerance and dialogue. Religious communities and leaders are crucial for peace. They can play a vital role across the peace continuum of conflict prevention, conflict resolution, and sustaining peace. Religions can bolster the values of human fraternity as well as the promotion of dialogue and understanding and the promotion of a culture of tolerance and coexistence. At the same time, religion can be misused as a tool for inciting violence and division. In our own region, we have seen the consequences of extremism or unchecked incitement to violence masquerading as religious faith. What is needed is constructive dialogue and the promotion of de-escalation. Religious leaders and institutions can be agents of peace, and in the face of intractable conflict, they must be. Mr. Chair, it is imperative that religious sites are treated with respect and maintained with care in the midst of conflict. As we have highlighted previously, religious sites and institutions are fundamental pillars of community. We are concerned that UNESCO has reported that 110 religious sites have now been damaged in the course of the conflict in Ukraine. Religious institutions and cultural and religious sites can provide axes around which communities can rebuild and heal. Their integrity must be maintained and protected. The devastation of the conflict in Ukraine has left few areas of life untouched. Religious leaders and communities of faith can play an important role in building peace and providing comfort in times of war. Today's topic is a reminder that the Security Council must prioritize conflict resolution and ultimately a cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. Arriving at a just and lasting peace must be our objective. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
I'd like to thank the briefers for their presentations. Freedom of worship is both a fundamental value and a universal human right. Freedom of religion is enshrined in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the Declaration on the Elimination of all forms of intolerance and discrimination based on religion and belief. The General Assembly and the Human Rights Council have adopted resolutions to combat intolerance, negative stereotypes, stigmatization, discrimination, incitement to violence, and violence, targeting people as a result of their religion or belief. Notably, GA Resolution 77/225 and Human Rights Council Resolution 1618. These values and fundamental rights are being attacked in the war that is going on in Ukraine, and the shockwaves are even extending to the religious domain, given the politicization of religion on both sides, with notably more than 100 religious sites that have been damaged, according to a recent report by UNESCO. However, history teaches us how close the link is between religion and war, whether it is the primary or secondary cause, or it being a breeding ground to fuel belligerence. We therefore call on all parties to show restraint and to refrain from any manipulation of religion and any form of attack on places of worship, ministries of worship, or worshippers as a result of their belonging to a religious community. President, every day that goes by in Ukraine, the situation is getting steadily worse and radicalizing in spite of the repeated appeals for hostilities to end. The combat between the parties is only getting worse. My country reiterates its appeal for a cessation of hostilities, calling on all parties to engage in dialogue in good faith by prioritizing diplomatic channels to put an end to the war. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Gabon, and I must now ask to see whether any UN member states who are not members of the Security Councils wish to take the floor. I see none. It is therefore time to conclude today's meeting. I thank our briefers for taking the time to convey to the international community the truth about the threats to freedom of religion in Ukraine. We heard in one of the statements about who destroyed the peaceful life of the innocent inhabitants of the country, and we have different views on this, something we've addressed repeatedly. You have turned a blind eye for a long 8 years to the crimes of the Kiev regime against its very own citizens in Donbass. And for some reason back then, you were completely unconcerned by the destruction of the peaceful lives of those innocent people. I wish to stress, especially for those who does not believe in what was said by us and the briefers today, and especially those who, once again, is calling what we have said today disinformation. Persecutions against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church did not begin in February of 2022. This is a campaign that has been systematically implemented by the Kiev regime since at least 2014, after the coup in Ukraine. Now, it has gone beyond all bounds. None of our former Western colleagues has called on Ukraine to uphold and protect the rights of worshipers. Unfortunately, some of you simply don't understand or do not wish to understand the meaning, the true meaning of what is going on, and what sort of persecutions are being carried out now against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church with the full support and even on the orders of Kiev's authorities. We nonetheless call on our colleagues in the Security Council, member states, and observers in the United Nations, as well as international human rights organizations, to think on the information that was shared today and to exert influence on Kiev in order to prevent a catastrophe and put an end to the persecution of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and its millions of parishioners. I also wish to draw attention to the fact that all of the materials that have been presented by our briefers in our mission today are available via the QR code, which is about to be displayed on the screen. And the links to these materials will also be posted on the mission's website and our social media accounts. I thank you for taking part in today's meeting, and this meeting is adjourned.